Welcome to the Edge of Innovation with InSource, the podcast that takes you on a thrilling ride through the world of digital transformation. Join us as we dive into the latest trends, cutting-edge technologies, and game-changing strategies that are revolutionizing manufacturing in industrial settings. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just curious about the future of industrial innovation, we've got something for everyone. In this episode, we discuss smart manufacturing. Join Jeff Miller, Director of Smart Manufacturing and Innovation for InSource, as he chats with Sree Hameed, Senior Marketing Manager for Smart Innovation for AVEVA. Jeff and Sree have a wide-ranging conversation, including everything from the foundational role MES plays for manufacturers, up through predictions for the future of smart manufacturing. Take it away, Jeff.
In today's fast-paced and often unpredictable global landscape, the ability to maintain a resilient and agile supply chain is more critical than ever. We saw during COVID-19 just how quickly disruptions can expose weaknesses and the urgent need for better visibility. This has driven a significant evolution in supply chain management with a major shift towards proactive decision-making, powered by what the industry is calling supply chain control towers. But what exactly fuels these sophisticated control towers, providing them with the real-time insights necessary to navigate complexities and optimize operations? The answer, as we'll explore today, lies significantly in the foundational role of the manufacturing execution system, or MES. So to help us unpack this crucial relationship and understand how MES acts as the bedrock for effective supply chain control towers, I'm delighted to welcome a very special guest, Sree Hameed. Sree is part of AVEVA's portfolio marketing organization responsible for a number of industry segments under the smart manufacturing umbrella. Before joining AVEVA, Sree spent his time in the supply chain space as well as the product lifecycle management space. And if that wasn't enough for him to do, he also serves as an advisor to the supply chain MBA program at the University of Texas in Dallas. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me. Always a pleasure to discuss the topic of smart manufacturing and supply chain with a fellow traveler on the journey.
Awesome. So, Sree, let's start by zooming out a little bit. Pre-COVID, manufacturers relied heavily on lean raw material inventories and just-in-time manufacturing. And for those who don't know, just-in-time was rooted in the Toyota production system, or sometimes called TPS. This approach really depends on a highly predictable supply chain. What weaknesses were highlighted during COVID?
Yeah, it's a good question to start with, stepping back and trying to understand, some of this stuff. It's interesting, I think I'm looking back fondly on the days of predictable supply chains compared to today. So about a year into COVID, as you know, I work closely with some of the research folks at the UT Dallas supply chain program. So we got together with them and we went and interviewed a few customers. And we basically asked them two questions. So first, tell us actually what happened. How did things go wrong? What went wrong? How? And then the second question was, if you knew in advance that a pandemic was about to happen, or I should say, broadly speaking, a set of disruptions were about to happen, how could you have better prepared for it? And then we did the interviews, we summarized the research, and we realized that there are actually 8 levers or capabilities, and we can actually, look at smart manufacturing as, being able to have these capabilities. So 3 of these levers are actually well known to us. We use these under what I, call quote unquote normal conditions. So the 3 basic levers are inventory, capacity, and time, right? And, we'd like to say that these 3 levers work like shock absorbers. Inventory is a shock absorber, whether it's in the form of raw material or finished goods. Capacity is a shock absorber, right? Our ability to run extra shifts or having idle or surge capacity. And then time, of course, is a shock absorber in the form of lead time, right? We're asking customers, for more time to fulfill, the orders. And we were well aware of these levers pre-pandemic. What we didn't realize as, weaknesses or vulnerabilities, and they became apparent during the pandemic, were these other 5 levers. So let me tackle the additional 5. So 2 of them, the next 2 that I'm going to talk about, we call them foundational because most people took these things for granted, right? So one is relationships, internal and external relationships, right?
Okay.
So for example, relationships with your own employees, right? And that they are there to count on. If you remember, we designated people as essential workers, and these people were expected to show up knowing that they were taking on risks when we didn't know a whole lot about the virus, right? And then when they did show up, we realized that things like skills rotation was important because if somebody didn't show up, you could easily substitute somebody else in there, right? And then the other aspect of relationships, if these were the internal relationships, then you can think of, the external partner relationships as well, because these were also put to the test, whether those were relationships with your, customers or your suppliers. So I'm sure this was something, you had also encountered with clients.
Yeah. So there were, during pandemic, I would have customer calls regularly, and they said that they weren't running a particular line or a different process because the person that was supposed to be running those scheduled was sick and could not come into work. And so they just did not run those equipment. They didn't have that swap in, swap out capability because they were running so lean on employee resources as well. So yeah, we ran into that a lot.
Yeah. And, and I have to remind myself of this because when we say smart manufacturing, we have a tendency to go to technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is so fundamental to, being smart overall. Then another lever or capability was information, right? Because suddenly we were looking for information that hadn't been collected before, right? Like one of our customers realized that they needed to start sharing planning information with their contract manufacturer. They sort of had this, hey, I have my manufacturing and my contract manufacturing was sort of this, someone else, but the need to share and treat that contract manufacturing capacity as part of their own and that transparency information sharing. So that was a big one, right? All part of the information capability. Then of the 3 remaining, 2 has to do with customers and suppliers. So segmentation is a lever, right? We had to prioritize what we could deliver, so some customers or suppliers became more important than others. If you remember, certain SKUs were rolled back by CPG companies. They couldn't make everything, the full portfolio as they had done during normal times. And then the other lever was price, right? Because you could say that, in a free market, demand, supply, price also varies. But at that time, governments also had price controls in place to prevent price gouging and things like that. So that's a lever as well. And then last but not least, cash, right? And what was interesting is that, CFOs recognized that they were in a unique situation and they were willing to make investments, to keep the business going. And so I would say that if you could point out that MES was critical, you would have definitely have gotten it funded back at that time. So, but just to recap, so the 8 levers are inventory, capacity, time, relationships, information, segmentation, price, and cash. So,
well, how have the supply chains evolved now knowing this? And especially with the rise of digitalization, what have you started seeing within your customers?
Yeah, so a natural outcome of that. So for companies who had done a good assessment and could have full visibility, some understanding of all the different levers, they could focus the investment on the levers that they saw as vulnerabilities and how to correct them.
Right.
So, and they perhaps looking at the priorities across the 8 levers, that's where they put most of those investments.
Do you see now that a lot of those weaknesses are forcing manufacturers to think differently about like the visibility and responsiveness of their suppliers and the supply chain?
I, I do think so. I think it was kind of a wake up moment, right? Because when you think about just this notion of real time data, you could say that, hey, everything is real time. We expect everything to be in real time. And if I think of a closed loop in terms of the ability to see, the ability to know, the ability to act, at a minimum, if I think of seeing or time to see something, I want to see it now. I want real
That's right.
time there. Now, time to know, that may take some time as I'm collecting more information, and then time to act. Again, I might be able to act with partial information, or I might need to wait until I have complete information, know it fully before I take some action. But between the time to see, know, and act, I'm really looking to close that control loop or that closed loop, compress the time within that as much as possible.
So if we're starting to collect this data and given it, I always like to have the data visible, obviously, but visible to the people at the right time with the
Yeah.
right data sets. But if you're starting to close that loop more, that means you've got to get more trusted data. You have to ensure that data is trusted, right?
Yes, very much so. Very
Yeah.
much so. And
And
go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
Sree.
so even those loops, some of our research showed that you can think of these loops as also 3 types of loops, because the loop is for problem solving. So if I think of 3 types of problem solving, so the if I think of situational problem solving, that is sort of break fix, just it's like something happened, just recover as quickly as possible. Then the second type of problem solving is called systemic problem solving, which is solve problems in a way that they don't reappear. So that's the continuous improvement, do the research, getting after root causes. So that's another type of problem solving. And then the third type of problem solving is what they call strategic problem solving. And that's where the conditions have changed. So you can think of problem solving as running the business, improving the business, and changing the business. But all of that, depending on the scope of information or the information that you're feeding these problem solving loops, have to be trusted.
Yeah, I think the trusted aspect, even when you hear about the word unified namespace in the industry today, the fact is you gotta have really a trusted namespace in order to make sure that you are making the right decisions for your organization. Now, you said something to me a while last week when we were talking, and you said that companies have shifted from about being efficient, always being efficient. Everything was efficiency, to now it's being efficient when possible, agile when necessary. Can you talk to me a little bit more about what you mean there?
Yeah. So this is a concept, or more rather a principle that we see at the supply chain level. So the adage is that you can have an efficient supply chain or a responsive supply chain, but not necessarily both. So there are certain trade-offs. You can think of an efficient supply chain and tied to an efficient plant as let's say that I make 5 products, and every day I only run one shift, one product. I don't make any changeovers. So you can say that that's an efficient production tied to an efficient supply chain. But let's say that I make 5 products every day. I'm making 5 changeovers. Now here I'm more responsive because I can fulfill any of those 5 products in a given day without having to carry inventory, right? So that this tension between being efficient and being responsive is there. And it's a question of knowing what makes sense for your business and finding that balance. And in under today's operating conditions, where there is a lot of disruptions, a lot of volatility, one of the things I liked how the Schneider Electric folks who run the Smart Manufacturing Initiative, they think of it as the balance, that agility at the plant level as being efficient whenever possible and then responsive when necessary, right? Because again, there is a cost to responsiveness, right? Typically when people say, okay, I'm going to take an order and turn it around in 24 hours or whatever, there is an added cost to that.
That's right. Yeah, most organizations, especially pre-pandemic, were focused on chaining as many like SKUs as possible and running as long as possible on lines.
Yeah.
And that doesn't give you a lot of agility when markets shift and change. And so being able to predict that is an important aspect of that. Recently, supply chain control towers have been out there for a while, but it really got a lot more focus post-pandemic. When we talk about how does MES really support the supply chain control tower concept?
Yeah, and this is something, it's been sort of this growing realization, over a time, because I hadn't sort of connected the dots, earlier. But as these business conditions were changing, it reminded me of something that I heard well over 20 years ago. There was a VP of manufacturing who described the relationship between the supply chain and the plant as one of making promises you can keep and keeping the promises you've made, right? And if you think of that handshake between the supply chain, which is the network, and the factory as the node, then making promises you can keep is about your capability to promise. I actually have good visibility into what I can and cannot do at any given time, So I make a promise that I know I can deliver on, and then, using MES to orchestrate, execute as planned, so I can actually meet my schedule adherence objectives. So those two, when I frame it in terms of that handshake as making promises you can keep, keeping the promises you can make, then you start to understand the value of an MES system in being able to just enable that philosophy.
Yeah, one of the things that I see that is critical about an MES, and it's differentiated from an MIS, which is a manufacturing information system, where it's about monitoring what's going on the plant floor, and there's very little executional control over what procedures are happening on the plant floor, and it doesn't allow for a lot of planned execution that's enforced, what we call disciplined execution.
Correct.
Of manufacturing, right?
Correct.
And MES can really play a role in helping to make sure that what you're planned to do actually happens. Yeah. And I see that as highly valuable in a supply chain control tower situation, because not only are you receiving what the supply chain control tower is asking you to do, you're asking to make these orders on this time so we can supply these other things within the chain. But ultimately, you're now able to ensure that actually happens on the timescales that you had predicted or expected, and then send that information back. But if something changes, during the plant floor because you got to be agile.
Yeah.
Machines break, people get sick, or things change. That information is funneled back up to the supply chain tower so they can understand how that's going to affect the overall linkages that they have.
Oh, 100%. I think like it's interesting. Everybody is after visibility. There's no question. They want real-time visibility, more complete visibility. But I feel like they leave off the control. I want visibility and control.
That's right.
Visibility is a lot like, it's like being able to see outside. You're driving, and I can see outside in front of my windshield what's happening. But I also need to be sitting in the driver's seat, holding the steering wheel to be able to make those corrections.
That's right.
And I think they go hand in hand. But I think all too often, I guess, when you're missing visibility, only after you gain visibility, you realize perhaps the importance of visibility and control. I don't know. That's my hypothesis. So
100%. I like your analogy because I wouldn't want to get in a car that I had complete visibility as I'm driving down the road, but I had no control over the steering wheel.
yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't want to get in that car, right?
Yeah.
Visibility doesn't do you a lot of great good there.
Well, or you hope that the road is straight and there are no turns and no
That's right.
obstacles.
What about the upstream partners, the people that are your suppliers as a raw material supplier? Some of the challenges that I see is you may put in an MES system and you may have visibility. And the supply chain control tower concept is about getting visibility across the entire supply chain from raw material supplier out and their raw material suppliers and their raw material suppliers all the way out to the customer. There's some challenges that are actually inherent to that if your raw material suppliers don't have an MES as well to give you that visibility into what their supply chain looks like.
Yeah, I think that it's actually incumbent upon the supply chain, let's say, orchestrator to provide that level of visibility. But I think today there aren't any technology obstacles to providing that visibility, And maybe this has to do with maybe the mindset of how people have been operating. What's interesting is that one of the customers we interviewed was, or one of the companies, I should say, we interviewed was a manufacturer of high-end servers. And for the better part of the last 20, 25 years, it's been a fully outsourced supply chain. I mean, what they do is they design the servers, but it's all, contract manufacturing, contract logistics. So for this company, because of the nature of their business, providing that full end-to-end transparency, there was no hurdle. It was, core to their business model. But I think if you haven't been that way and you're trying to, evolve to greater transparency, maybe it's more, I don't know, I think it's more cultural people process than the actual technology. Because as you know, with some of the things that AVEVA is doing with Connect, etc., being able to provide that visibility is not an issue, right?
That's right. Well, I'm glad you bring that up. I was going to transition us into the Connect and this concept of trusted namespace, but the value of getting data up into a platform like Connect, I think is AI and predictive analytics. Being able to close that loop, to be able to come to some prescriptive understanding or predictive understanding of what's going to happen, or how can I redirect my manufacturing to do something in a different way so that I don't see something happen, right? Yeah. That's negative. What's your view on where AVEVA is going with Connect and how AI and predictive analytics can really play into that space?
So I think, maybe we should look at this as sort of this having two parts. One is the part of sharing and providing transparency, and the second part about actually the data you can trust. because I think all too often, it doesn't matter whether you're sharing across the supply chain or sharing within the enterprise. If people stop trusting the data you're giving, then that collaboration stops happening anyway, right?
Yeah, so we call that democratization of data, right?
Yeah,
Giving visibility to that information, that data that isn't sitting behind an OT network somewhere, but it's
yeah,
also married and contextualized with other data sources as well.
correct. And I think that one of the key things that MES provides, it's that rich contextualization, right? Because if we think about, from a context perspective, I need four things to make something, right? I need the customer order with all the, how the product is to be made.
Yep.
I need the raw materials. I need the capacity in the form of assets and all the utilities, the corresponding utilities that go with it. And it is that integrated model that exists within an MES system. So that ability to use that MES model, that MES data structure to pull that context, that rich context together, and it's using real-time accurate data in a timely fashion. And so now I have something that is of trustworthy context. And then with a platform like Connect, I'm able to share that with all of its relevant detail to either upstream or downstream, right?
Right. Yeah, so the Connect can actually really support the supply chain control tower.
Yeah.
Give that visibility so that that organization can make better decisions as well,
Yeah.
and do it without having to invent ways to move that data from that MES database that's on-prem across the MESs that they might have. And Connect really makes that simple by just right-clicking and saying move to the cloud.
Yeah.
That's the value of, from my perspective, that AVEVA really brings, is simplifying that data transfer to the cloud, especially from
Absolutely.
MES and time series data.
100%. But I do think that it raises some other topics that we haven't thought about. So I think when we say trustworthy data, timely, everybody's going to be nodding along, right? But um, but I wonder, like, if I use the analogy of a library, good libraries need librarians to organize data,
Right.
to do all of those things. And one of the things I see at the, let's say, IT supply chain level, there's a lot more mature organization in terms of, data curation, and there's designated roles in actually, who are responsible for the quality of the data and the curation of the data. That is not that obvious or mature on the OT side of things, right? So I think companies do have to think about, if we, in order to have trustworthy data, then who are the people who are responsible for that? Is that clearly identified, right? The equivalent of the librarians of that execution data, right?
I 100% agree. One of the challenges you get is if you just start shipping data to the cloud just willy nilly, that data quickly becomes very murky. And everybody's familiar with the word data swamp. I'm not,
Yeah.
inventing
Mhm.
something new here, but that's what I like about the Connect product, is that it allows for you to keep from getting that data swamp because of
Correct.
the contextualization, the curation, that enables, and the fact that there is a delivery mechanism to the cloud that ensures that there's not a gap in data, which has been problems with other clients that we've had where they've struggled with gaps in data when they were trying to do their analytics.
Absolutely. And I think that, even underneath Connect, you can, see, when we start to sort of unpack trustworthy data and trusted namespaces, even there, it's a system of systems, right? Um, that there could be multiple layers of trusted namespaces. If there is an app that, a small group of users use day in, day out basis, let's say it's a limb system that's doing product quality, that is a trusted namespace, right? Now that trusted namespace might be part of the MES namespace, and that MES namespace may be part of another, broader operations namespace. But the idea is that, just like when, we're building any kind of structure, each brick is something that is robust that you're putting in. And as you're building the systems landscape, that element of trust and reliability is always there, right?
Yeah. Understood. Yeah. You don't want to put a brick in that is cracked at the bottom of your foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. Because again, it's, my sense is that looking at the way the OT space is and it has evolved, it will continue to be a multi-vendor landscape.
Yeah.
But so long as there is an integrated data management strategy ensuring that data discipline, I think we should be fine.
Let's get back to AI and predictive analytics. Everybody's talking about that. I see Connect as that jumping off point to enable those platforms and those technologies. I know, Sree, there is a lot of technology that AVEVA has developed that's surrounding Connect. Just talk a little bit about what value AI models or predictive models that are sitting there today.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I support a number of industry segments, life sciences, just general manufacturing, CPG, etc. And I think that a lot of what AI tool to use is driven by largely the subject matter experts of a certain area. Whether it's, I see customers in life sciences, if it's let's say around asset reliability, gravitating towards a set of AI models, right? I think the debate is still going on, is AI application specific, or could you have a more generalized toolkit around AI? I think, there's both, but at the end of the day, it's the customer that largely gets to drive which AI model that they find it's easy to maintain, etc. But looking at the evolving AI landscape, it further reinforced this idea of the trusted namespace to feed the AI models. Because when you're having problems, if the AI model is struggling to provide accuracy and predictability, then it goes back to the data that you're feeding it, right?
That's right. We had a customer. They put in a time series database. One of our historians. They put in the MES platform, and the next step is, what are you going to do with all that data? How are you going to use it? You have it now. How are you going to use it? And they really invested in building out a product clone, a digital clone of their process, so they could start doing predictive analytics or prescriptive analytics. Prescriptive analytics, so that they could drive to their operations teams. If you run within these parameters, we go out of 300 setup parameters, 300 configurations, focus on these 5. And if you run between these areas, you will not see this issue arise. And that's being prescriptive, but that relies heavily on the quality of data. That data is trusted. The data is reliable, and so that is one of the value props of AVEVA, in my opinion, is that data is trusted and reliable.
100%. And maybe the lesson here is that when we think about data management, data discipline, how shall I put this? We tend to think incrementally, So let's say that I want to monitor something, right? So I put in the infrastructure to monitor. But then I realize that, oops, I'm getting a lot of data, but I don't have enough data to diagnose it, right?
Right.
I got to go now incrementally do a little bit more so I can get diagnostics, and so on and so forth. But even if, but if we think about the end state and say, look, I really want a predictive model, with or without, however I do it, but I think about that end state vision and then build out a data strategy. Because I think that it's not the most efficient way if you sort of try to incrementally improve something. It's a lot better to think of the end state vision that what I really want is a high fidelity digital twin of whatever process that I'm, be it a quality process or an asset management process, and then figure out how to get there, right? That I think, a lot of people like a crawl, walk, run approach to
Yep.
evolution, but I think some things you actually have to think about the end state. And because sometimes, I think which is why I think we end up a lot of times with these Frankenstein types of architectures because
That's
we
right.
didn't think through the end state vision.
Yeah. So this is a thing that really frustrates me. I see a lot of times companies coming in and they look to pilot a technology,
Yeah.
and and the reality is that technology works, right? It's never the technology's issue
No.
on when
Yeah.
it doesn't work, but they come into pilot technology for whatever reason, because that's kind of the standard practice that they know about in order to ensure that they're buying something of value. But I always talk about piloting the vision, because if you pilot the vision,
Yes.
you're looking at the end state outcomes. The outcomes are what you're really looking for. And what happens when you pilot the technology is you pilot the technology, but you forget about all the stuff that happens to happen in order for that technology to be successful. And when you pilot that technology, all of a sudden you don't see the outcomes. You don't see, well, we didn't gain any,
Yeah.
the operators didn't just gravitate and start using it. This is not, hey, we'll build it and they will come. This is not the field of dreams. It's
Yeah.
technology is not that way. Technology has to be incorporated and married into the organization. And that means you have to pilot a vision for what your outcome is going to be, and not just the technology.
100%. And uh, I speaking on behalf of when we are guilty of like pushing a technology
Uh
centric
huh.
narrative. We try not to do that. But I do think about, so if you want to become a doctor, you go to a medical school. There is an end state vision you think about, and then there's the classes that you go through. But all too often, it feels like, especially from a technology centric perspective, you've enrolled into a university, you're taking courses here and there without actually having a plan of how I'm
That's
going to
right.
graduate and what I'm going to be doing,
That's
right?
right. Yeah. And so you don't graduate on time.
Yeah,
Yeah. You
exactly.
took all these courses. Yeah.
Yeah. And all these courses are exciting. Digital twin,
Yeah.
AI. There's no shortage of these exciting, things to go work on.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, Sree, I'm going to leave you one last question before we head off. What excites you the most about where smart manufacturing is heading over the next few years?
I think that it's the realization that smart manufacturing is part of the broader business. It's not something. Yeah, my takeaway is that smart manufacturing isn't about the factory. It applies to the whole business, right? And in that vein, that smart manufacturing is not just about technology, it's about the people, the process, the policies. And I think the more we can think of it holistically and we can enable that conversation, because I think all too often we fragment these things, right? All the more reason that even if the conversation is about, or at least, you're trying to put something, whether it's an MES, HMI, SCADA technology, being able to see that in the context of the bigger vision, the smart operation, smart manufacturing vision, and being able to, again, get with the economic buyer and and validating that and having some clarity on how this enabler is going to achieve that broader vision.
Yeah, me personally, I'm excited about large language models and how they're going to be
Oh yeah,
incorporated
yeah,
into our the AVEVA products, the processes that we do, that we interface with, that these things are just going to be smarter and smarter and smarter. They're already really, 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 really powerful. I know there's lots of flaws and all that today, but they're just going to get smarter and smarter and smarter, and they're also going to get more applicable.
Yes.
And that's the key, is they're going to get more applicable. And I can see where these things are going to evolve to where it's really going to make, I think, people want to work in manufacturing again. And people think that, large language models are going to replace or AI is going to replace people. And the reality is, I know there's been studies that said that only 30% of occupations could be 100% automatable, possibly. Yeah. And so that's not going to be the case. But I think these are going to be, human assisted AI is going to be where
100%.
where new technology is going to meet with manufacturing, and hopefully revitalize where people want to work in manufacturing, and the young folks want to come in and be a part of that story.
Correct. And I think that, we're moving towards a future where getting into manufacturing doesn't mean sort of, it's beyond that, a certain operational type of work, that you're taking some ownership and pride in helping make something. You have that holistic perspective.
Yep.
Because I think that, if we look at manufacturing as I'm doing, if I break it into its parts and I'm doing a certain part, there's a high risk of that part being obsoleted by technology. But if you're looking at the holistic view of manufacturing, everything that's coming together and helping orchestrate all of that, I think that job is not going away.
That's right. Well, thank you, Sree. It's been a joy talking with you today.
Oh, likewise. Always a pleasure with fellow travelers on the journey. So
I think we've covered enough topics today. So I'll let you get back to the rest of your day, and I'll get back to the rest of my day.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us at the Edge of Innovation. We hope you'll join us next time for another stone in the path of the digital transformation journey.